So first up today, have Mr. Ed Cullen from the Kansas Association of Chiefs of Police, Kansas Sheriff's Association, and Kansas Peace Officers Association. Mr. Cullen, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Appreciate the opportunity to speak today. Our testimony is in opposition to sections 1 through 11 of the bill. We are not opining on sections 12 to 14 or section 15, but I'll be glad to answer questions on those if you have questions. Our association opposes the legalization of cannabis-based products in any form for medical or recreational purposes. It's outside the standards of medical and medical research protocols. This bill does not seem to us to be within those protocols. Senator King mentioned yesterday about the change in DEA and FDA standards, and those are the kinds of things that we do support. This is the path our association support with experimentation and CBD oils and other extracted products from cannabis. These bills tend to be a precursor to broader legalization of marijuana. Full medical marijuana seems to be the tipping point, and so that's part of our concerns with bills like this. The provisions of this bill are very similar to medical marijuana legalization. They have shops licensed by a state agency unrelated to pharmacies. They feature very little, if any, quality control. Sales are made available to registered individuals, and registration is based on doctor's certifications, not prescriptions per se, not through the normal prescription channels. There are several control deficiencies in this bill. For example, and I'll just mention a few of them here, the bill allows a person to possess a 60-day supply. It doesn't say how often you can replenish that supply, nor does it say how quickly they can be used. There's no control of purchasing the product at multiple shops or within certain time periods of previous purchases. There's no provisions for immediate inspections or other investigatory safeguards similar to what applies to liquor stores, such as immediate access to the premises and things like that for the licensing authorities. There's no provision for disqualifying an applicant to operate a medical hemp establishment who has felony conviction for violent crimes or for drug crimes. There's nothing to restrict consumption of the hemp by a person who is not intended to be used for. The makers of the bill have chosen to call this a medical hemp bill. I'll point out to you, this is not a hemp bill, this is a marijuana bill. Most states, in fact, we didn't find any state that calls these bills a hemp bill. They call them low THC medical marijuana bills. They call it what it really is. In the middle of my first page of my testimony, in the quotes, you will see something from a government document that explains that hemp is part of the cannabis plant. They are one and the same. You can't have hemp without having a marijuana plant. And I would point you to that in my testimony. This bill allows up to 3% THC in these plants. That's rather high for what other states do. Many of them limit it to less than 1%. This bill does not do anything to require any specific level or minimum level of CBDs, which is the chemical content that it is supposedly has potential for medical benefit. So that's an important gap in this bill. There are direct law enforcement concerns on page 2 of my testimony. Pay particular attention to the last one, item number 7, that talks about the cost to the labs, as we have to test for quantity of THC in these provisions. The bulk of my testimony is some charts from Colorado that shows the devastating effects on the public when medical marijuana is legalized. And I want to point out, they did medical marijuana, they didn't do a limited version like this bill is, but it has an effect. I want you to see what those effects were. And I'm not going to go through all those in the limited time I have. The last pages of my written testimony is a document from the American Epilepsy Society. That's a group that was referenced by one of the proponents yesterday. And here's some of the things you'll see highlighted in that document. It's one you should all read. It was directed to the governor of Idaho July 13th of 2015 in response to a similar bill in Idaho. And they said things like that artisanal high CBD oil resulted in no significant reduction in seizures in the majority of patients. It said those that parents did report improvements did not reflect any improvements in the EEGs, the gold standard monitoring test for people with epilepsy. 13% of the patients got worse, with some reporting significant adverse effects. And on the second page in the third paragraph, you'll see complications from unregulated, highly variable artisanal preparations of cannabis oil prescribed in most cases by physicians with no training in pediatrics, neurology, or epilepsy. Not a single pediatric neurologist in Colorado recommends the use of artisanal cannabis preparations. This organization is opposed to the use of artisanal preparations of unregulated compounds of cannabis that contain unverified content and are produced by people with no experience in pharmaceutical production. And there is no clinical research to support the adoption of new CBD legislation for epilepsy. This is from a group that supports families with epileptic members. And this is the results of their looking at some of the studies. Last night I came across another document from their site, and I'll share this with you by email later. And I'll sum up this as my last point, Mr. Chairman. They noted in this, and this was a summary of 3 studies on the CBDs and epilepsy. And one study, they noted that the adverse effect occurred in 47% of patients with increased seizures or new seizures in 21%. In another study that showed the most promise, they indicated that this came from a highly purified pharmaceutical grade of oil, not the kind we're talking about producing in Kansas, with a CBD to THC ratio of 15:1. So it's the CBD that has to be there for this stuff to have any promise of working at all. And this bill does nothing to assure that that's going to be there. Although the study suggests a potential role for CBD in the treatment of these diseases, it is important to note this study does not represent compelling evidence of efficacy or safety. That's out of that same study. And then a third study says we cannot recommend CBD treatment based on the limited evidence at this time. Since the effect of CBD treatment on other medications is undetermined, we recommend that physicians work with families to determine if adjustments to other medications are necessary. Mr. Chairman, I think that supports our position of why we feel that these kind of studies need to be done in a very controlled environment with pharmaceutical grade products under established norms for this kind of research. And I'll be glad to stand for questions. I have a lot of material in my testimony. I apologize for the written testimony being so long. You know I don't like to do that, but the first 2 pages is really my testimony. The other is supporting data.
Hey, I'm sure we'll have questions.